Hi, welcome to today's Courageous Conversation. I'm Peggy Oliveira. Today's question came from Jamie, and she shared a little bit about her story around forgiveness. This is something that comes up all the time in the work that I do, and I think just kind of generally for a lot of people, the idea of forgiveness. And her question specifically was, can you ever truly heal if you do not forgive your perpetrator or perpetrators? And this is a question or an idea that comes up so often for survivors. And there's different reasons for that. But the short answer, the quick answer is yes, absolutely, you can heal without ever having to forgive, whatever that might mean to you, your abuser. I know that for some of you, that might feel like, what? No, you have to be able to forgive. Otherwise, you're going to have maintain this energetic connection. But first of all, I think it's important to recognize that one person's idea of forgiveness may look different than somebody else's. What matters ultimately is, what does it mean to you? And whatever it means to you, calling it forgiveness, I don't believe is necessary in order to be able to heal. You can absolutely release that energetic connection or tie to that person without ever having to say to yourself or anybody else that you forgive. And one of the most difficult things about this in my work has come from people or through people that grew up in religious or spiritual settings. Even a lot of people who find spirituality in their adult lives really struggle with believing that you have to forgive in order to heal, even in order to be a good person or a good Christian, in order to have God forgive you. That's a really strong belief that a lot of people hold on to, which is why when you feel like you're having difficulty forgiving, it has such a profound impact on you, because you take that as more proof that there's something wrong with you, that you're a bad person. So I want to talk a little bit about what is important around this issue. Saying to somebody, or even to yourself, that you forgive somebody for something that they've done to you isn't necessary. But part of the reason that we feel that we need to do that is because we hold on to, like, that we have that energetic tie. We feel resentment or hurt or anger towards the person who hurt us, or the people who still support that person or didn't protect us, or whatever it may be. So we have a lot of thoughts and feelings around the perpetrator. It is necessary to be able to release those feelings. Some would argue that you do that by forgiving. I would argue that you do that by healing, which doesn't have anything to do with forgiveness. You do that by healing the ways that you were wounded by the abuse, which ultimately really have very little to do with the abuser. You don't continue to struggle because you haven't forgiven your abuser. You don't continue to struggle because your abuser has a hold over you, because you've got this energetic tie. You continue to struggle because of what you believe about yourself as a result of the abuse. So in healing the ways that you've been wounded from the abuse, which there's many ways that you've been affected, been hurt, been impacted by the abuse. When you heal those things, you naturally release that energetic tie to the perpetrator. It really happens pretty organically. Now, you might have a lot of very specific thoughts about how that person betrayed you, how they used you, how they threatened you and hurt you, and you might have a lot of very specific thoughts around that. But as you heal that, again, doesn't have anything to do with the perpetrator, but as you heal what that has meant for you, then that energetic tie dissipates. So, for example, if part of what you find that you hold on to a lot or think a lot about that affects how you feel is betrayal. You feel like, I can't believe this person hurt me. They were supposed to protect me. I should have been safe. Whatever it is. Those things are true. You should have been able to feel safe. You should have been able to trust. You should have been protected. All of that is true. But what you're really healing is the idea that the reason that that person didn't protect you, or the reason that that person betrayed you, is because of who you are. Because they didn't love you, because you're bad, because you deserved it, because you were being punished for being bad or being a horrible human being, whatever that is. But what you're healing is the wound of being bad, being at fault, being unworthy of love from that person. That's ultimately really what you're healing. So as you heal that, and that's a complicated, complex, lengthy process, but as you heal that, that energetic tie that you have is no longer there. And I realize that that may not make a lot of sense if you haven't been able to do any healing yet around some of those ties or some of the ways that you're affected by that. But if you've heard me talk about the fact that the long-term impact of abuse, the ways that we continue to struggle into adulthood are not so much about the abuse, but the meaning that we attach to it. That's what I'm talking about here. The meaning that we attach when somebody betrays us is, in part, they didn't love us. We deserved it. It has to be something about me that draws that kind of attention. And if it's somebody that should have protected you and loved you, and they betrayed you, not only did they betray you, but then you also interpret that to mean that they must not have loved you. And if it's a parent or somebody that should absolutely love you unconditionally and protect you, then you're also likely going to interpret that as being unworthy of being loved. So when you heal those pieces, which you can do without forgiving a perpetrator, when you heal that, then that energetic tie is no longer there. So forgiveness specifically is not necessary. Even if, which is incredibly rare, but even if your perpetrator apologizes to you, it doesn't mean that you have to forgive. You can, if that feels genuine for you and not coming from a place of obligation or that you should forgive. But let's face it, it's incredibly rare that a perpetrator is actually going to ask for forgiveness for what they've done to you. But you can release and heal without that. I have not personally forgiven any of the people that abused or assaulted me. Nobody's asked, but I also haven't found it necessary for myself. And I completely have released any energetic ties to the people that have done that, who have hurt me, who have violated me in those ways. Because I've done the healing of the wound that was created. Doesn't mean I want to have that person in my life, those people in my life. Doesn't mean that that it's not a big deal, because it is, and they had no right to do the things to me that they did. But I did not have to forgive them in order to be able to heal. One of the things that I see quite often as well is people will say, I've forgiven him or her or them. I hear people say that so often. However, sometimes in that same sentence, or sometimes a week or a month later, they're still feeling all this stuff around the perpetrator. And the reason for that is because maybe they've said the words to themselves or somebody else, but they haven't done the healing yet. And I believe forgiveness is not my area of expertise, but healing trauma is. I fully believe that saying that you forgive somebody, particularly when it comes from a place of feeling that you should or believing that you should, is not the same as true forgiveness. But again, true forgiveness is not necessary for healing. But so many people have this idea that if they don't forgive, then there's something wrong with them, that they're not a good person, that people deserve second chances, whatever it is that you've said to yourself. But the people who tend to struggle with this idea the most are the ones who believe that they should forgive, who believe that they have forgiven, yet still struggle. So if that is you, and this is the case for Jamie, she had forgiven, like she had said those words. I don't know if it was to herself or to somebody else, but she had in her mind forgiven, but had not actually healed. And that is what is necessary. And it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of patience. It takes a lot of practice to be able to do that healing that is necessary. Forgiveness should never come from a place. It's never going to be helpful if it comes from a place of should. Whether it's somebody else telling you that you should, or you feeling within yourself, believing within yourself that you should forgive. Rarely is it ever going to be helpful. And there is a difference from my perspective between forgiveness and release. And releasing is what is necessary. There's another piece to this that I think is also important. And I used to say, and you've maybe heard me say if you've been following me for a while, that the only real forgiveness necessary for healing is forgiving yourself. Forgiving yourself for all the ways that you blame yourself, for the ways that you hold on to shame, for the ways that you've coped, or the anger, or the inability to be present, all those ways that you beat yourself up. I've said for years that we have to be able to forgive ourselves for those things in order to be able to heal. And I do believe, generally speaking, that is true, for sure. But I've started recognizing relatively recently that in saying that we have to forgive ourselves, it perpetuates the idea that there's something to forgive, that we somehow have done something wrong by not saying no, by coping in ways that are not healthy, by struggling with anger or inability to be present and the impact that that's had on somebody else, that somehow we're at fault for that, that we should be blamed for that. And so what I've started, or how I've started talking about it instead, is instead of forgiving yourself, having compassion for yourself. Because we don't need to forgive ourselves for loving our perpetrator. Absolutely not. If your perpetrator was somebody that you had in your life who played an important role in some way and you love them, even if they hurt you, that's not something to forgive. That's a natural thing to experience. If you didn't say no, that's not something to forgive. It's something to recognize is reality. Very, very rarely is it likely that a child is going to say no. It's incredibly rare. So why would you have the need to forgive yourself for not doing something that nobody would do? The idea of forgiving yourself for ending up with an addiction or other self-sabotaging behaviors suggests that you've done something wrong, that your struggle is somehow different than other people's. I think it's more about finding self-compassion for the ways that you struggled, for the ways that you didn't protect yourself, for the ways that maybe you struggle with showing up for other people, because that's something that we all do struggle with on a certain level, right? Either we're depressed and so aren't able to be fully present for other people, or we deal with the way that we feel by being maybe irritable or angry or short with other people. And if you've hurt somebody, I think that self-forgiveness can be important there, because it's important that we take responsibility for our actions. But that's different than holding on to guilt or blame or shame because of how we've been impacted. Now, I want to separate something here a little bit. If you have been abusive towards other people, that's a different layer, and that's not really what I'm referring to here. If you have been abused and you in turn have abused somebody else, emotionally, psychologically, physically, or sexually, there's no excuse. Under any circumstance, there's absolutely no excuse for that. But I do think no matter what, in those situations, self-forgiveness probably is going to be important. Trying to make amends in some way, fully accepting responsibility for what you've done, I think is important. It's important not only for that other person, but it's important for you. Because it's only from fully accepting responsibility that we can really forgive ourselves. So in those types of circumstances, I think self-forgiveness specifically is important. But for all of those other things that we judge ourselves so harshly for, the things that we beat ourselves up for, the very fact that we struggle, so many of us judge ourselves for, that we should be stronger, we shouldn't still be affected by it, right? And you get angry at yourself. That anger might even lead to self-sabotaging behavior, more self-sabotaging behavior. But I'm moving away from calling it self-forgiveness because all those ways that we cope are natural ways of coping. So there's nothing really to forgive. There's healing to do so that we can find new and healthier ways of coping. There's self-compassion that we need to be able to have in order to heal and release ourselves from all the guilt and shame and responsibility around that we feel. So think about it in that way. Think about how you might view somebody else that you care about, who didn't say no, who was abused over a period of time, who had multiple abusers, all the things that we blame ourselves for or feel like somehow it was our fault. If you were to look at somebody else that you care about, or maybe even that you don't even know that well, but if you were able to look at them and say to yourself, well, of course they didn't say no, or of course they struggle, of course they feel suicidal, of course they turn to addiction, whatever that is, or of course they're angry. Having that same compassion for yourself is so important, right? You wouldn't likely look at that person and think that you have to forgive them. You'd look at that person and think, well, you'd feel compassion, but you'd also think something along the lines of, wow, I'm so sorry that you struggle so much, right? You deserve that same compassion. So I hope that this has been helpful, Jamie. I also hope that it's been helpful for any of you who struggle with the idea of forgiveness. And I think that this is true no matter what way we've been hurt by somebody. And again, there is a difference between forgiving somebody in kind of a traditional sense. There's a difference between forgiving somebody and releasing the energetic tie that we have to them. So if you have a question that you'd like me to answer, please send it to Q&A@Courageous Journeys. And please follow me. If you're not, please subscribe to this channel so that you get all the latest videos. And follow me on Facebook is where I spend the majority of my time. You can find me there at Peggy Oliveira. And of course, you can see how to spell my name somewhere, probably many places on this page. So follow me on Facebook. I share lots of stuff there. I do live videos there. And I would love to be able to connect with you on a more personal level. So thank you all for joining me, and I will look forward to seeing you next time. Bye.